Assassination of Donald Trump before the elections. What happens if the US presidential candidate dies or is forced to leave the race? 2024 US presidential elections. Who are the competitors? On July 21st, US President Joe Biden announced his withdrawal from the presidential elections after partisan and popular pressure, following a disastrous performance in his debate with his Republican rival Donald Trump, which cast a lot of doubt on his mental fitness and his ability to hold the position for another 4 years, which led him to withdraw and support his deputy Kamala Harris, who became the Democratic candidate in the race, with only a few days left before the start of the voting that will decide the outcome of the race for the White House. Questions are being raised about the scenarios in which American law deals with an emergency with one of the candidates, such as death or the need to withdraw. While Harris, 59 years old, appears to be in good health, the assassination attempt that Trump, 78 years old, was subjected to almost killed him had he not moved his head at the moment of shooting. Had the attacker achieved his goal, it would have been enough to shuffle the Republican cards to choose a new candidate. The process of replacing a presidential candidate depends largely on when the vacancy occurs, whether during the primary election process, before the party convention, during or after the convention, or before or after. The voters vote in November. What happens if a candidate dies before being officially nominated at the national convention? In general, candidates are chosen during the primary elections. During the national convention, the delegates supporting a particular candidate come and vote for him. So there is no confusion here, it is just a matter of confirmation. When a candidate dies before the national convention, other candidates can compete to secure the nomination, which is an internal matter for the party. What if a candidate drops out after the national convention? It would take a major event for a candidate to drop out of the race in the few months between the party's nominating convention in the summer and the general election in November. Democrats and Republicans have slightly different ways of handling this possibility. For the Democratic Party, the National Committee has the authority to fill any vacancy after the convention. Under party rules, after the party chairman consults with Democratic state governors and their representatives in Congress. For the Republican Party, if a vacancy occurs, the National Committee can either reconvene the National Convention or choose a new nominee itself. What happens if a candidate dies before the election? What happens if a candidate dies before the election? Both the Democratic and Republican National Committees have rules that require their members to vote for a replacement candidate, but it will likely be too late to do so in time for the election. Unless Congress postpones the election, voters will still have to choose between the two candidates, even if one dies before the election. But the questions don't end there. If the deceased person wins, what happens if a candidate dies between the National Convention and Election Day? There are two scenarios for this. First, the candidate dies before the ballot is printed, and second, the death occurs after the ballot is posted. In the first case, Democrats replace the candidate through a convention made up of members of Congress and the Democratic Governors Association, while Republicans call up delegates and vote on a new candidate. As for the second scenario, the rules are still unclear, but it is generally understood that this makes no difference in the election, since people vote for delegates who in turn vote for a particular candidate, and those delegates form part of the Electoral College, so it doesn't make any difference to the candidate. What happens if a candidate dies before the Electoral College votes? Under the Electoral College system, the winner of the US election is determined by obtaining a majority of the electoral votes allocated to the 50 states and the District of Columbia in proportion to their population. The electors meet on December 14th to vote. The winner must receive at least 270 of the 538 total Electoral College votes. The votes allocated to each state typically go to the winner of the popular vote in that state. Some states allow electors to vote as they wish, but more than half of states require electors to vote for the winner of the popular vote. Most state laws that require electors do not address the question of what to do if Michigan's law, for example, requires delegates to vote for the winning candidates who appear on the ballot, while Indiana's law requires delegates to switch to a party's replacement if the candidate dies. If the candidate dies, the opposing party may challenge in court whether delegates, who are bound by their states to vote, should be allowed to vote for a replacement from the party. What if the winner dies after the Electoral College votes, but before Congress certifies the result? After the Electoral College votes, Congress must still convene on January 6th to certify the results. If a presidential candidate wins a majority of the electoral votes and then dies, it is not entirely clear how Congress would resolve the situation. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution states that the Vice President-elect becomes President if the President-elect dies before Inauguration Day, but the legal question remains whether a candidate formally becomes President-elect after winning the Electoral College vote or after Congress certifies the result. If Congress rejects the votes for a deceased candidate and thus finds that no one has won a majority, it is up to the House of Representatives to choose the next president from among the top 3 Electoral College vote getters. There is no precedent for a winning candidate dying after the election but before inauguration. The closest case came in 1872, when Horace Greeley died on November 29th, weeks after losing the election to Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th President of the United States. His 66 electoral votes were largely split between his running mate and other minor candidates. What happens when a candidate dies between Election Day, November 5th, and before Congress meets on January 6th? The U.S. Congress meets on January 6th to certify the Electoral College vote. If a candidate dies before that meeting, there is a contingent election by the House of Representatives. What happens if a president-elect dies or becomes incapacitated after Congress has certified the result? Under the U.S. Constitution, the president-elect is sworn in on January 20th, Inauguration Day, 2 weeks after Congress certifies the election result. If the president-elect dies, the vice president is sworn in on January 20th.